Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Today we got Thomas and Ben Wilson, two Springhellions.
Yes.
What does it mean to be a Springhellion?
Well, the generation, not the generation, but the guys ahead of us sort of set the bar on that thing, and it included Spring Hill was out in the country at that time.
Well, what years is this?
Now, we were baby boomers, post-war, and brothers and sisters were born one in 1933, other in 34, and these are the kids that grew up here during the war. So we got the pre-war, then you got the post-war, and then you got Spring Hill back in the 50s when it started becoming fashionable. Before that, it was just in the country. My grandmother lived in Elmira Street downtown. The cousins teased my sister, said she was a hick because she lived in the country, So this was, and it was annexed in 1956 when we were little boys. And the people out here, the old timers, didn't want to be part of Mobile.
But now Spring Hill Manor, where we are now, this is one of the biggest spots in the city, nicest spots.
Spring Hill Manor is a small neighborhood that was built during World War II. There was a severe housing shortage because Mobile had 3 shipyards, and people from the surrounding states were coming in here. Spring Hill Manor is just one of the small subdivisions that came about during the war. But the Spring Hill area itself, you refer to the Springhellions. I had a friend of mine who I went to grammar school with confided in me when we were 30. He said, I was scared of y'all, and he's older than us. And I said, why? He said, because y'all knew all the long cuss words. And he said, I was really scared of your brother. And I said, well, why? He said, well, it'd be 20 degrees outside. All they'd have on would be a T-shirt, a thin jacket, Levi's rolled up and barefooted. I said, well, what's so terrifying about that? Well, they were 14 years old smoking cigarettes and putting out the cigarette butts with their bare feet.
Oh, man.
So that kind of set the tone.
Was that y'all?
No,
that was
older
brother.
Older brother.
So that was the generation of the same generation as us, but they were 14, 15 years older since Tom and I were born after the war.
Can you edit any of what I'm getting ready to say?
Probably not, but just
Okay,
go for it.
No, I can't say it then. There's
right.
a story about when the houses were being built down there. I can't tell the story really because it has a little bit of profanity in it.
Can you bleep it out?
Can I bleep it out?
Yeah.
Can you bleep it out?
No, he can't tell it without that, so we'll just let that one slide.
It was a good story though.
But you were asking about the Springhellions. That generation and the neighbors across the street, I mean, they were pranksters for sure. Peter Pierce and Binky West used to get the grandmother's car at night and sneak it out. And there was a policeman sitting up on the corner. It hadn't been in the city limits very long. There was a policeman sitting at behind St. Paul's Church. And these 2 boys that were barely old enough to have driver's licenses
didn't have
were
driver's license.
drag racing up Tuthill Lane between O'Shell and Spring Hill Avenue. And, of course, the policeman pulled them over. Let me see your driver's license. We don't have one. Whose car is this? It's my grandmother's car.
What kind of car was it?
56 Ford Victoria. She'd come in, they'd run gas out of it. And she'd come in and say, I don't know why my gas tank's empty. So what they would do, the guy that owned the Shell station, he lived across the street, so they would do it. When they got to run the gas out, they'd siphon hose out of his tank of his truck and fill it back up, put it back in the driveway.
Oh, man.
Yes,
Smoking a cigarette while they're doing it,
But anyway, they asked the other guy, well, whose car is this? This is my grandmother's. I mean, they're sneaking out at midnight.
Yeah.
But there were quite a few pranksters. There's an article, the Springhellions in Mobile Bay Monthly,
right.
which is July.
Yeah, I read that.
about the traffic light.
Yeah,
that
was
the older brother.
Right, that was right at Old Shell and McGregor.
Correct.
There was one lone light here. There was a really interesting family that lived here, the Dominics. They were Italian. Their family owns the 4 generations in children's shoes. John Dominic was 93 years old, and he made the statement, it's just a quaint little village, and he's talking about during, post-World War II when he came back, in the late 40s, early 50s. It's a perfect description. He said there was nothing here, just a blinking light at the intersection of O'Shell and McGregor. And my older brother went to shoot the light out in the wee hours just before daylight.
They had a bounty out, and everybody knew who did it. But the sheriff had a bounty out, but nobody would tell him. Everybody knew who was doing it.
Why didn't you guys want the light?
Well, the light was an intrusion upon they could tell with the light was going to come change. In those days, we could walk out our back door and go squirrel hunting, rabbit hunting.
Go swimming in the reservoir.
Yeah, sneak over in the reservoir and behind the cemetery and go swimming, or sneak down to College Lake and go swimming. And the traffic light was a symbol that everything was about to change. It was just overnight. Spring Hill was going to change from an idyllic setting, and so the boys, the teenagers, got together, and every night it was somebody's turn to go up and shoot it out. So
they'd have to get up early and earlier each morning to keep from getting
because
caught.
the sheriff was watching out for them. So just before daylight, Johnny had that Browning automatic. He walked up to the intersection and he put it to his shoulder, and something doesn't seem right. So he brought it down. He felt somebody was there. Sure enough, there was a little old man sitting under the kind of in the shade, waiting for the bus in the shadows of the night, waiting for daylight to catch the bus to go downtown, because downtown was 5 miles away. And Johnny had that Brownie in his hip, pointed to the ground. He said, "Are you for it or against it?" And the little old man said, "I'm against it, I'm against it." Blam, he blew it out. And none of the adults would turn the teenagers in because they were against Mobile swallowing up Spring Hill. It was an interesting community. You had future attorneys, future military officers. You had bankers, accountants, physicians. In my sister's fourth grade class, there was a class picture, and most of them were barefooted. And these were sons of these professional people, educators. And
so the kids are just wild.
Well, no, they weren't. The kids weren't wild. Just that one little group was. But what I'm saying is, the elementary school had a rule: if you came to school barefooted, it was okay. But if you wore shoes, then you'd have to keep them on. So mother would go out to hang the clothes up, and she'd looked in the communion bush. There's about a dozen pair of shoes hidden under the bush. So these children of professional people, it's just a way of life. And those weren't the wild ones. It was a small group that were the wild ones. But during the war, there was a Norwegian ship captain that was in charge of the shipbuilding in the 3 shipyards in Mobile for the war effort. They'd build a Liberty ship in a month and launch it. And anyway, his children were in the school, and his daughter came home and said, half of these children don't have shoes. So the captain's wife came, and she said, "I want to make a donation, shoes for these children." And the principal says, "You don't understand. These children's parents are so wealthy they could buy untold number of pairs of shoes for the whole school." So they just don't. It's just a way of life here, hunting and fishing and playing in the woods and that sort of thing.
To give it some perspective, when we grew up, I guess we're about 8 years old in 1956 when the Spring Hill came into the city, and when we were growing up, the only 2 paved streets were O'Shell. McGregor's a packed shell, and Tut Hill and the Cedars were paved. Stein Street was dirt.
Spring Hill dead ended at McGregor.
Wow.
By St. Ignatius.
Yeah.
No, beyond the next block, beyond St. Ignatius.
And so basically, when Mobile, Spring Hill came into the city. Then there were a lot of changes. First thing they did, they moved in and they put drainage systems in. They paved the street.
So was it upsetting when y'all were annexed in?
It was
Well,
very upsetting to us and to a lot of people here because
the
Spring
old-
Hill was a
the old-
quiet.
The old families that
idyllic
lived here,
place.
like the Gilliards, Palmer Gilliard was a self-taught lawyer, practicing law as an admiralty attorney till he was over 100. Well, all the Gilliards, their family had been here since Alabama was a territory, not necessarily in Spring Hill, but they lived in an antebellum home off of Myrtlewood Lane, and they wanted no part of Mobile because the city limits at that time was right down was it Sage
Sage Avenue.
Sage Avenue.
That's a
And-
ways.
And so it all it was a big change, and of course you adapt to change. And when we were growing up, Spring Hill College, there were 3 entrances to Spring Hill College. You had the Avenue of the Oaks, you had the main entrance, and then College Lane. And so
Everything was from O'Shell.
and we used to play. I'm maybe getting ahead of myself, but you probably got other questions. But I was going to describe what Spring Hill College was like.
Yeah.
That might be. You want me?
Yeah, describe it.
And when we were growing up, there was Tulin Hall. They built Tulin Hall. We used to play football at Tulin Hall. There was no O'Leary Hall, and there was no Tulin Hall. And
Excuse me for interrupting. Spring Hill College was racially integrated before it became co-ed. So when the co-eds came to Spring Hill later, there was no place for the co-eds to stay. So the families along O'Shell Road took in the co-eds.
they
And,
boarded, like the
boarded
Carpe Diem was
Yeah.
one such place.
So from our front steps on the northwest corner of Dilson and O'Shell, where the physician's offices are now, we had a straight view from our front steps to Byrne Library and what is now the soccer field in front of it. When Tulin Hall and some of these other dormitories were built to accommodate the female students, then that messed up our view.
Not just our view, but we used to play tackle football without equipment. The church home boys down there and play tackle football right where Tulin Hall is, and they took a football field away. That Tulin Hall did. I can tell you that was some hard ground when you hit that ground. That ground was hard. And another thing that was very impressive, thought about this last night, Life magazine, at the very last page of every Life, they had a full-page photo called Miscellany, which means it translates into all things or something like that, or many things. And on that photograph, I remember Life magazine, there was a picture of Spring Hill College, and at noon, very impressive, at noon, the ROTC would march at noon and march around the campus. And there was a picture in Life magazine, that last page of Miscellany, of the ROTC marching, and it was taken right about where Tulin Hall is now, and you could see all the way across the plain there. It's very, very impressive because at noon it was just very, very impressive.
Starch khaki uniforms and the bands playing, and they had the Spring Hill had what they called the Pershing Rifles. They were a crack drill team, and that's what Life. Was it Life? Look.
It was Life magazine, and every issue, the very last page was miscellany of many things. I think it was translation.
That photo of Spring Hill College with the
full-page photo of it, and I couldn't verify this, but I'm thinking that the enrollment at Spring Hill College there was probably around 400.
Wow.
And so it was very small. And as I recall, it was it's more of I won't call it a commuter college. That's the wrong description. But most of the students here were not from here, like yourself. Some came. They came from St. Louis, came down from Florida, and it was very well thought of academically as it is now. And you had a pre-professional curriculum. People that went to med school, and these priests had a say-so as whether or not you got in dental school or med school or whatever. They carried a lot of weight. There's a lot of similarities between Georgetown and Spring Hill College. And we had an uncle who went up to Georgetown in 1928, the Depression hit, and then he ended up coming to Spring Hill. And I was going to go from that point into the athletics, into the football, and that we can discuss that. You may have some further questions on that.
But I got a question on the like Spring Hill's named after the natural springs.
Yes, of course.
How prevalent were those?
Very prevalent. Ben, talk about the spring, the extension.
The spring that fed College Lake. In our uncle's time, he was a multi-sport athlete. He was on the boxing team at Georgetown when the Depression hit and he had to come back home. Spring Hill had many sports, including their football team that they played Auburn, Alabama.
They didn't play Alabama. They played Tulane, LSU, and Auburn.
But anyway, the students were used. The athletes were used as they used them for labor to help build the golf course and the Byrne Library. But College Lake was already here. And Uncle Henry told us that they had Olympic swimming events in College Lake, Olympic-style swimming athletic events. And the water of the lake wasn't that cold, but the spring. You asked about the spring. You'll have to see photographs of this because that little house of our time, there was a little enclave. There was an open building with a roof, and they had an open spot in the middle with ice cold spring water coming out.
It's called Dead Man's Coffin.
And we would take bets as children as to who could lie in that little rectangular box the longest. You couldn't long because that water was ice cold. A tornado in the 90s skipped across Airport Boulevard and landed and tore that little house up. It was ornate. You'll have to look at the photographs of it.
Ben, tell about the springs on Dolphin Street.
The springs were disrupted with the construction of Interstate 65, and that's what killed Mirror Lake, what we called College Lake. There's still water in there, but they used a clay base because the area around here was Rag Swamp. Rag Swamp was a huge swamp from the base of Forest Hill and Spring Hill and further all the way down to Highway 90. It was a vast swamp that the outlaws hid in. The swamp was still there, so they had to muck out that swamp to build the interstate. So they needed a sand-clay mixture. So they had a contract with Spring Hill to get the clay. And when they borrowed the clay from the bases of the hills, it disrupted these ice-cold springs.
Oh, man.
And one of the Spring Hill boys is a civil engineer. Actually, his father designed the interstate. The Interstate 65 was supposed to be further east, but Spring Hill College owned land all the way to what is now the east side of Interstate 65. So Mr. McGow changed the design of the interstate and moved it further west by about maybe 500 feet at least, maybe 1,000 feet. So Spring Hill College would have prime business land on both sides of the interstate. One project we did.
So sorry to interrupt, but
yeah.
When y'all were running around here as kids, that was all Spring Hill's territory, right?
Yeah, the Spring Hill College. You're talking about this territory of the community
of the college.
Yeah.
So that was access for y'all to, because it wasn't developed.
Yes, it was a swamp. Spring Hill College owned part of a small section of Rag Swamp, which was a natural area. And when the interstate came through, it was shifted over to give Spring Hill valuable land.
Yeah.
The son of that engineer is also still a civil engineer. We did the extension of Dolphin Street. We did that construction project, and there were tons of springs coming out of the hill where Dolphin Street comes up now. And it was after that extension of Dolphin Street that the entrance to Spring Hill College was shifted to Dolphin.
Is it possible for another natural spring to form from the underground resources?
I'm sure, but with all the development, where would it go?
Yeah, right.
That was a real tragedy, and beautiful things disappear. Now, Mirror Lake existed in sometime probably in the post-war between the states year. One side of the Wilson side of our family moved here in the late 1880s, and my grandfather told a story He was born in 1875 in St. Louis.
1878.
1878 in St. Louis. So he's a little boy when they moved here, and he talked about a bunch of them sneaking in Spring Hill into College Lake, and the priest chased them out, and he's talking about this had to be in maybe 1888, 1889. A bunch of little boys running butt naked through the briars and woods.
He said all you could see was the priest chasing them, and they run the bare ass boys running up the road. I've forgotten all about that story. He moved here, I would suppose, in 1882.
Where'd they move from?
Well, they lived all over. They came from West
Petersburg.
Virginia, and then there was a St. Louis connection, and then my great grandfather moved out to territory of New Mexico, and was my grandfather's uncle was a territorial governor, attorney general for the territory of New Mexico. So he went out there to open banks and railroads. Right. And his brother's long story is a whole nother story, but his brother was killed by Geronimo, and then he had gotten some people to come out to invest in the silver mines, and they went out into the Gila Mountains in 1882 on foot with a derringer, and Geronimo jumped on and shot him. But anyway, they moved to Mobile.
Was Geronimo mob? I'm confused.
No, Geronimo, the Apache chief.
Oh.
And an odd thing about that is the Indians that brutally murdered my grandfather's uncle, who he is named for, were incarcerated at Fort Stoddard in Mount Vernon. And we had other relatives. The first territorial capital
was the land patent office for the territory of Alabama.
Was
Alabama territory.
Was north of here, and what happened is that same grandfather that was as a little boy was chased out away from the lake by the priest. Geronimo and his family were incarcerated north of here, and on the way to see relatives, they stopped in.
St. Stephen's is where they were, and he talked about going up there as a teenager and looking the man in the eye that killed his uncle.
Geronimo?
Yes. Geronimo was incarcerated initially in the Dry Tortugas, and they had problems with the respiratory problems, and they moved him to Fort Pickens, and then for a short time he was in Mount Vernon, and this is how this transpired.
But anyway, so Mirror Lake was there certainly after the war between the states, and it was there viable through our childhood in our teenage years in the 60s. It was there a long time, and you would like to review the photos of that little house that was over the spring. But those springs were ice cold. I know we got off the subject. We're bad about that.
It's all good.
But anyway, those springs were ice cold. The substructure also has springs, but there's so much development now. Where would the springs go if they did reform? And maybe the people that objected to the citification of Spring Hill, of the community of Spring Hill, maybe they were right, because a lot of those wonderful things have disappeared for good.
Yeah, it's sad.
Yep.
But it's really cool that y'all were able to experience all of them.
And I wanted to say another thing. Almost all the faculty at Spring Hill were Jesuits, priests, and in our day and time, you would see them early morning and also at dusk walking around in long black robes meditating, and it was really interesting.
Could you talk to them, or were they doing their own thing?
You didn't want to interrupt them during their quiet time, but you would see them walking, just meditating, and you wouldn't want to interrupt them at that time. But any other time than that, you could talk to them all the time. And I'll send you, which I have on flash drive, the photograph of my older brother Hellion. There's a photograph of him taken at the baseball diamond in his football uniform, kind of striking a Heisman pose, and there's a note on the back written by the priest that was their coach. I'll send that to you.
Please.
But
So how do you do most of your file sharing? Because you shared with me you got that flip phone. I think that's
everything I do is on a laptop.
I think
And I've
that's
got a
awesome.
new
You got a flip phone.
laptop coming. Anyway, I did want to say that um, Tom and I were premature at birth on March 4th, 1948. Our father was an avid golfer. We were in a hospital at Mobile Infirmary probably the first 3 weeks of our lives since we were premature. But one of the first things that Daddy did when we came home is take us down on the golf course. So at about age 1 month old, Tom and I have been on the campus here, and Spring Hill has some great baseball teams in the 50s. In fact, there may have been a Heisman Trophy winner that played here as a naval officer.
No. The Spring Hill, you're aware of where Cuba got its Cuban baseball originated here at Spring Hill. You were aware
Right,
of that.
but I knew that happened. But how did it transfer?
Well, what happened during the war between the states, all the men were gone, and so you had Cuban students up here, and so they played baseball up here, and after
Giving you a little background, Mobile and Havana had a real special trade relationship for centuries. And the families were connected. Mobile was a big Catholic town, just like Havana. So when the student population left to fight the war, then families from Cuba sent their children up to Spring Hill to be
in
educated.
1864 they went back down here, and that's how Cuban baseball started, because when Cuba gained the independence from Spain, they didn't want bullfighting to be their national sport. They wanted their own identity, so that's how baseball became. Baseball in Cuba originated here because the students in
The priests
1864.
taught them how to play. They taught them the game, and the students, when they graduated, went down and introduced the game to Cuba.
And back in the 50s, Spring Hill had some good baseball teams. They played Auburn down here, and they played the Naval Academy. And on the Academy team was a midshipman who was the Heisman Trophy winner. Joe Bellino won the Heisman Trophy at the Naval Academy in 1960, and he was on that baseball team. So you had a Heisman Trophy winner that played here.
Now, it could have been the base team at Pensacola.
It was the Naval Academy because they brought him back. They brought him over here. I just remember they pulled up in these old blue Navy buses, and but the Heisman Trophy winner was on that Navy team, and they played Auburn here. They played, and again we get into the prep school here, and then the football team here. I'll also when we get into that. We'll discuss that a little bit further about the athletics here. In addition to being the oldest continuous, you're aware of this, the oldest continuous baseball team in the NCAA.
Collegiate team, yeah.
He is here at Spring Hill.
Mm-hmm.
So the baseball goes back a long way, but we recall that a lot of really good teams that Spring Hill had here in the 50s.
And y'all came to the games?
Oh,
and
absolutely.
watched?
I mean, like I said, our father rolled us out on the golf course with him, to the clubhouse when we were 2 weeks old. So Tom and I have been coming on campus here. We're 76 years old, so we've been coming on the campus for 76
Another
years.
side here also, our father had an insurance agency down on St. Joseph Street, and he was one of the first property and casualty underwriters. And so he would give lessons at Spring Hill College. Spring Hill College let him use a room so he could give lessons for the other fellow agents free of his time. And we can remember him preparing his lessons over on O'Shell Road. And he would give his free time to teach other agents the course. So he taught them at Spring Hill. And Spring Hill was kind enough to donate a place for him to do that. And I just remember him doing his lesson plans.
Wow.
And so it was just a neat, small little community. And
so would he teach students too?
No, these were fellow agents that were trying to
look
get
for the highest professional designation nationwide.
My father was one of the first chartered property and casualty underwriters in Mobile, and he taught the course here at Spring Hill to his fellow agents. It was sort of like an adult. He donated his time, and Spring Hill provided him a place to to give his lessons to fellow agents.
How long has insurance been around?
Insurance been around, period?
Yeah.
Well, the insurance business started back during the colonies. You hear of Lloyd's of London. They would meet in the tea houses and they would underwrite these voyages coming over to the colonies. So that's how it started.
For ships?
For ships and cargoes and all that. And they would meet in the tea houses back during the colonial times and underwrite the insurance. And that's sort of how, I don't know if that's how Lloyd's of London, but that's sort of how it started. And our family was in the insurance business here for 100 years, and 99 years.
Our family had one of the largest and oldest property and casualty agency
in the South.
In the whole South. Really.
And my father had his own agency on St. Joseph Street, so he was a World War II veteran, came back and opened up his own agency, and then he became a chartered property and casualty underwriter in 1952, and then would of his own free time teach a course in Spring Hill, provide a classroom for him.
You want to go ahead?
What was it like when your father went off to war?
Well, we weren't born then.
See, we were.
Oh, yeah,
And-
my bad.
but I'll give you a little bit of background. Late in the war, they started drafting married guys in Spring Hill with children. But our father was sole surviving son and had 3 children. And he never in the hell would have ever been drafted, but he wanted to go. And so he tried to join the Navy. The Navy wouldn't take him. He was colorblind, but the Army took him. And when the war ended, he was in the Philippines. Now, I'll give you another aside as to how that was. I worked down, after my father died, on the riverfront to put myself through South Alabama. And this will tie into another story about Spring Hill College later on in the interview. But I worked as a clerk or chucker down there. Had an old man that worked down there. He had an one-arm guy. And all the longshoremen had nicknames for people. Called him Wang because it looked like a chicken wing. And so he talked about late in the war, they drafted him. And so they took him.
He lost his arm as a child.
So what happened was he got up there and they said, "What are you doing here?" And he says, "I've been trying to tell y'all I ain't had an arm since I was 12 years old." So as he was leaving, you could hear him talking about these senators freaks up here now. So late in the war, they were drafting men out in Spring Hill, and my father never would go, but a lot of the other men did. And they were fought in the Battle of the Bulge, and then my father went off to war and then came back and after the war, and then started his own insurance agency in 1946, and so I don't know if I answered your question adequately.
Yeah, you did. A different kind of topic is the Britton Boys.
The Britton Boys.
And in the article, I read a piece where they got an alligator from Gulf Shores, put it in the back of their truck,
Yep.
and then
Well,
would pick up Spring Hill students looking to get beer.
Well,
And
give you a little background. Everything during that tenure, during the 40s and 50s, everything in Mobile was downtown 5 miles away. Everything, all the stores, if you wanted to get clothes. Now, there were grocery stores out this way. There was a grocery store on the northwest corner of O'Shell and McGregor. But if you wanted to get, if you wanted to go to a department store or something like that, all those were downtown.
That's before Bel Air Mall and Springdale Mall were built,
Before
because
the interstate
they were
went there.
built when the interstate came. Springdale's built on the Rag Swamp, so you had to go downtown to
So
get
the
folks
college
everything.
students frequently had to hitchhike from Spring Hill to downtown 5 miles away.
Now, Johnny Britton was a man among boys, you might say. And he was 15 years old. Somebody needed a tree taken down, he'd do it. He was I won't say he was a ruffian, but you just really didn't want to mess with him. And so they were constantly playing tricks, and that was sort of one of the tricks that they did.
how'd they wrestle an alligator in the back?
Well,
of the
it
truck?
was a small
gator.
It was a small gator,
Still.
but then the gator got larger and larger and larger, and they would keep the gator up under. It was not a truck; it was a car, and it was a '56 Ford, a black '56 Ford. So they had the gator under the seat, and had a little rope on him
Seat.
in the back, and the gator would go up on the front seat, and they had a
underneath the front seat.
underneath the front
Tied under
seat.
the front seat.
But they had a rope tied. The college boys would hitchhike, and oh yeah, we jump in the back. And so they got in the back, and the damn gator would come out, and they had just enough lawn on him where he'd see those three Spring Hill College boys sitting in each other's lap and over by the door. The gator couldn't quite reach them, you know. He just hissed at him,
Hissing and snapping, and the three boys in the back, Spring Hill College boys in the back seat were suddenly on the passenger side of the back seat, sitting in each other's lap. This 3-foot gator hissing and snapping.
The gator got to be about 4 feet before they turned him loose in Municipal Park.
Wow. Do you think there's still alligators in that pond?
I'm
think sure so. There are gators along.
I go
3
running
Mile
there
Creek.
sometimes.
Yeah, there are probably gators along 3 Mile Creek, I'm sure.
There was a story.
Would you see gators in the swamps around here?
No.
Well, we kind of played mostly in the gullies, places you wouldn't find gators. Spring Hill College behind Stewart Field has an elevation of right around 200 feet. The topography of Mobile Bay is really interesting. You have a 100-foot elevation along the eastern shore, 100 feet of elevation along the eastern shore, which is allegedly the highest coastal elevation between Maine and Mexico on the eastern side of the bay. And you have in that area Montrose and Fairhope. The topography of the west side of the bay, the high ground is about 5 miles from the bay. But when you get the high ground, instead of being 100 feet, it's like I said, it's about 200 feet elevation near Stewart Field.
Yeah.
198, isn't it?
Well, it's right at 200, but anyway, if not 200. So the elevations are higher over here, but they're farther away from the bay.
Right.
I'm sure there were gators in Rag Swamp, but most of the time we played in the gullies.
We never
and
really
woods,
saw any alligators here. I don't recall seeing any gators
except
here.
along 3 Mile Creek, which the original name of 3 Mile Creek was Bioshattagay, and I wish that they would take the old name back.
You talk about gators. There was an engineer walking along near Mobile Infirmary with his dog. I don't recall the breed dog it was. I think it was a lab, and the gator came out and took to get the dog. It took his left arm off. He was an engineer, ripped his arm off at the socket, and he later said, "Well, I guess I have to learn to write with my other hand,
But
So the
you'd
gators
find them
are
in the
prevalent.
creeks, but not
We don't recall ever seeing gators here.
Gotcha.
on
Gotcha.
Spring Hill because of the elevation, because of the topography and the gullies.
Yeah. This is the highest point in the city, right?
Yes.
I would say probably so.
Well, someone told me there's a place out in Dawes. I can't substantiate that. Randy claims that it's higher out there, but
Cottage Hill, there may be some higher elevations. There may be some higher elevations out west, but 200 feet, give or take, is a pretty good elevation. And the wonderful thing about that is I've seen moonlight on. I've stood at Stewart Field and seen moonlight on Mobile Bay. So I mean, the original Scottish owner.
You saying you saw the bay all the way from Stewart Field?
Yeah, I can see moonlight reflecting on the bay.
How many years ago was that?
Oh God, that's childhood.
Yeah, because now the trees are all grown up.
Yes. I mean, you'd have to get at a certain spot to see it, and it's interesting in the fall time right now. You can stand near Stewart Field and you can see the fog on Dog River. It's a real neat thing, when the weather starts turning cool. But it's a real interesting topography, and it was really paradise in childhood. And when the city came in, we knew all that would disappear. And there were certain elements that resisted it. The Springhellions. I mean, they weren't known as that then. This is just that term was birthed by that article. I mean, we didn't use that. Nobody used that term.
Right.
Just a bunch of barefoot little boys getting into mischief.
Well, I need a favorite memory from each of y'all during your time as Springhellions.
We were more or less victims of the Springhellions.
Really?
And
but your brother was one of the.
yeah, he was one of them.
The older ones, they were.
No, we'll put it this way: the boys older than us didn't mess with us because they knew that they had to. The Springhellions would take care of it, because anyone that was walking along, and by the time they're 19 years old, and they take us barefooted in the wintertime, smoking cigarettes,
14.
putting out with their bare foot, that's pretty intimidating to a 4-year-old. To me, a 4-year-old, and not only that, after my brother was killed, I had an adult tell me it's intimidating to adults too to see that, and so so the main recollection I have growing up here is that it was very quiet, and a car would go by maybe every 20 minutes.
Oh no, shell.
And you didn't have the noise and the traffic. So and we slept. The house was probably built in the 1880s, 1890s, and it had like 4 fireplaces and maybe a dozen gas heaters, and it was raised cottage, and so we slept we never had central air conditioning or anything like that, and we slept with the windows open. And so you could with a screen. So and we didn't have air conditioning, and we weren't uncomfortable with all the trees and all. But I can remember sleeping and hearing all the critters outside, the cicadas and all that. And that was a real pleasant experience. And there just weren't a lot of people, not a lot of traffic.
Yeah.
And you'll notice also that you'll see the going into Brooklyn, you'll see the FedEx planes that'll fly right over where the rugby field is, and well, you could hear the planes coming into Brooklyn Air Force Base at night, and that was another thing, because that flight path was right over our house.
These were all prop planes, that the Air
flying
Force had.
boxcars.
We didn't have the jet noise, but the path was right over us.
Well, the
flight path.
The quaint aspect of it, and we had a semicircle driveway with gravel with camellias, and I believe that our house, it was all the Star Wars home. I believe it was part of a farm at one time, because you could see the pecan trees lining rows all the way back to Stein Street, and all the people that work for the families here, they take a lunch break to come over in our yard and pick up grocery bags full of pecans in the yard, big figs that big around, and it was just really neat. I mean, if you wanted to grow up at that time, it was sort of like a Huckleberry Finn sort of experience, and it's just neat growing up. All the streets were dirt, and all the families, they knew each other, and you didn't have to worry about you just better be home at 6 o'clock for supper,
Right.
And another interesting story also is where Carpe Diem. We'll get into that another time. Real interesting story about that and the family there. And
that's a coffee shop now.
Yes.
For how many years has it been a coffee shop?
Well, probably since 1990s,
Right.
Several businesses. It was a private home.
Yeah.
One time.
And that was one of the homes that housed the co-eds until the dormitories were built.
And did your family ever take on any co-eds?
No, they probably they wouldn't let that happen. Not with my brother. Any of us
He was already gone. But anyway, the lady that lived there was born in Cardiff, Wales, and her sister had married a prominent attorney in Mobile.
Came over at age 18. Came in through New Orleans.
And but anyway,
he was a rector at St. Paul's, and they lived in the house from about 1911 till her death in 1968.
Well, actually, I don't know if they built that particular house. The house we're talking about is on the northeast corner of Dilston and Old Shell. It's now the Carpe Diem Coffee House. I do know this, that that family moved into that house about 1915, and as I said, the matriarch of the family came here at age 18 from Cardiff, Wales, to visit her sister, who had married a prominent attorney in Mobile, who lived maybe a half mile away at the end of Ulster Lane off McGregor, and she met an English merchant. He was a merchant marine officer in the English merchant marine, who became very religious and became an Episcopal priest and it opened up churches all over the world because he saw a gap in the spiritual needs of merchant seamen worldwide. And somehow he ended up as the rector at St. Paul's when that
Reverend Pierce was his name,
and
P-A-R-C-E.
P-A-R-C-E. And basically that structure consisted only of the little white chapel that was built in 1859, I think, in the 1850s. But the rector of Spring Hill College, of St. Paul's, actually resided on Spring Hill College property.
Was St. Paul's kind of created with Spring Hill?
No, it was. It was
completely separate?
Yeah, it's Spring Hill College. A lot of people don't know this. If you go to the library, the current library, I don't know if the book is. I came across some old books. I think Spring Hill College may have been initially called St. Joseph's College because I saw some old stamps in these books. St. Joseph's College, Spring Hill, Alabama. It's the oldest Jesuit, it's the oldest college in the state of Alabama. So Spring Hill College was here in 1830. I'm thinking that St. Paul's Episcopal maybe preceded the war between the states. I know it did because you had Catholic families, but you also had Protestant families in Spring Hill. So I would say that Spring Hill College probably predated St. Paul's Episcopal Church at least 30 or 40 years. So there was no connection in that respect that I know of. But anyway, getting back to the lady that visited her sister and never went back to, she visited relatives and never went back to Cardiff. She married the Englishman who was a former merchant marine officer who
Reverend Pierce.
turned Episcopal priest, and they raised their two sons in that particular
She was
house.
my affinity for tea stems from there. She'd come out at 10 o'clock in the morning and at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And if it was in the wintertime, it was hot tea. If summer, it was iced tea. Tea, darlings. And
Very British accent.
And her boys, her grandsons rather.
They were like 4 or 5 years old.
They were the Hellions too. These boys were
two of the three. One of them kind of tried to keep the rest of us in line. David, the eldest son, David, tried to keep the rest of us in line.
And
Mike, Peter.
But Mrs. Howard, Ann Starkey Pierce Howard, was very, very, very British. Tea, darlings, and so they were constantly pulling tricks on her. And this is in the article.
Her kids?
Her
grandkids.
Her grandsons.
And she would walk every day to the post office and say, "Good morning, darlings," and they'd say, "Grandma, that just takes too much time to do that." This means, flipping of the verbs, the extension of the middle finger, this means good morning. So they'd go in with David Mann, who was the son of the rector at St. Paul's, and they'd go up behind her in the crowded day of the shopping center over here. They'd lean down on the horn. She'd turn around and flip them off, thinking that meant good morning.
They told her that was an American greeting signal, and here's a 70-year-old woman flipping them off.
Oh my God!
And so she housed the Spring Hill College girls. If you walk into Carpe Diem, if you look at the ceiling, you'll notice that it was a partition. So it was actually it was an apartment on one side, so she rented the apartment on one side, on the west side, which faced our breakfast room, and then her back room, and there was a hallway that went straight down the hall. And she was an artist. She had a little studio there, and for Christmas she'd paint little English country scenes for people and give them away as Christmas presents. She had little paintings and all that in there. Very, very, and so that's the story about Ann.
I can still smell. Now I'm 76 years old. I can still vividly smell the scent of the oil paint. On the front, on the southeast part of the house, there aren't dormer windows, but the windows aren't straight across. She would have her artwork on pallets the oil paint would be drying, and I could smell the oil paint. My favorite was a clipper ship that she painted with billowing sails and clouds and seas.
Another thing also is that she painted, and this really sort of angered me, and it's not any of my business. But if you walked in the old Carpe Diem, the previous owner, Ann Howard, painted little sailboats on the wall that were still there.
On the cornice of what it became the ladies' restroom, up until a few years ago, those little sailing scenes that she painted on all four walls.
And another interesting
were preserved until a few years
Another
ago.
interesting.
They've been there 60 years.
They painted over them, or
Yep.
Yeah, somebody decided let's just paint over them.
oh man,
And
that's
that
just
was
like-
so interesting thing. She always walked to the post office. All the post office was in the Spring Hill Shopping Center, but the postman knocked on the door one time, and I watched her open this package from her brother in England. And as I watched her open the package, it was a piece of mahogany. Piece of mahogany with a shrapnel on it, and her brother was a captain of an English merchant ship during World War I.
Do you recall the name of the vessel?
SS Torrington, and they had a contract with the Italian government to haul coal, and they were coming back, and they saw a lifeboat floating, and a U-boat laid a trap for them, sunk them, and the guy and so he they took him aboard to interrogate him. They submerged the vessel, but he left a lifeboat with provisions, and they noticed that those provisions left on the lifeboat were on the submarine. And with this guy, this German U-boat captain, his name was Wilhelm. I forget his last name, but he was notorious of sinking hospital ships. And he sunk the Carpathia, which was a hospital ship, the sister ship to the, and so what he did was no one ever saw the crew. They submerged with the crew, either shot them or drowned them. Nobody ever saw the crew because he asked the radioman. He said, "Well, we're 120 miles southwest of England. There are not any heavy. They're calm seas. I guess my crew is safely in England." He said, "No, they aren't." Well, what he had done, he carried that piece of shrapnel in his pocket, and through the POW camps to bring formal charges against the German government after the war. And I remember Ann Howard telling me that he survived by eating rubbish out of the garbage, and that's
While
how he's in the POW camp. And he caved that shrapnel, and they brought formal charges against and it was all dropped. And so he was sending her, and you turned it up, and the piece of shrapnel is mounted, and it said, SS Torrington sunk by U-boat U such and such on Easter Sunday, 1917. And so what she has was that shrapnel, and also a hand-carried signed letter, hand-carried from King George to her brother.
No way.
The family still has
the family still has the shrapnel with on the piece of mahogany, and the
handwritten thank you note from King George, thanking him for
to
his
Captain Starkey. And so that was her English background, but I remember her opening that, and that was the story behind it.
And you saw her open it?
Yeah, I was watched her open. I was wondering what it was, because she normally walked to the post office, and the postman knocked on the door, and I watched her open it, and I was about maybe 10 years old, and I watched her open it, and I looked at it, and that was the story behind that. And this captain disappeared.
German captain.
The U-boat captain disappeared and went to work for between the war in Brazil at a plantation, and then resurfaced on the SS during the Second World War. But this guy was notorious. He sunk hospital ships, and no one ever saw Captain Starkey never saw his crew again.
But Captain Starkey finally, after trying to bring formal charges multiple times during the 20s, he finally made the statement, something that I will never.
I wish to never talk about this again.
Yeah, that's.
I wish to never talk about it. But that was her brother.
Why do you think he released that?
Because
he tried everything. He tried everything he could to bring.
The treaty was so harsh on the Germans, which gave birth, in my opinion, to the Third Reich.
The Treaty of Versailles was so harsh to the Germans,
they whitewashed that. They just didn't press it.
So Captain Starkey's crew was expendable, and he saw that all his efforts during the 20s were going nowhere.
And
so it's so painful for him to recall it. after a certain point, he said, "This is it."
Okay.
And then he had sent it. But anyway, the whole story, I'm getting off on these tangents. The story was watching her open that thing.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Two crazy pieces of history that were right here.
And
A question I have is, like, life seemed, everything was more relaxed and simpler back when y'all were kids compared to where it is now. Why do you think it's changed so much?
well,
Sheer
look,
numbers.
we came along,
People.
number of people, but also there were no cell phones there. We had the first television in the neighborhood. And then we had the first color television in the neighborhood. And so you had radio, and you didn't you didn't have the cell phones and that sort of thing.
You didn't.
So
have,
you think cell phones are a big cause to the
no,
crazy society?
No.
Well, I
don't
think that
so.
people are addicted to cell phones, and I got one in my pocket right now, and also the TV and everything else, And so you don't stop to smell. You don't take, as Robert Frost talked about, the two roads diverging in the wood. I took the one less traveled. We were around nature, and we were around a slower society, not as much as our brothers and sisters who were Depression era kids, but it was a lot slower, and there were a lot of people. Spring Hill didn't become fashionable until the mid '60s. To its flight, and then you had people that moved out in Spring Hill. They had maybe a $300 mortgage, but it's just slower, and families were closer.
I think several things take you away from the natural world, the natural, quiet, idyllic world that Tom described, sleeping at night with the windows open. You had screens on the windows and hearing the sounds of the critters at night, and almost no traffic on O'Shell except for, people going to work in the morning. The streetcars were already gone by the time we got here, but you can still see, I can take you right now and show evidence of where the tracks were in certain places in Spring Hill.
Mm-hmm. Orange Beach is the same way. It's had the same thing.
I think that what I was trying to say is that the increase in population takes you away from the natural world, the nature that we experienced. I think technology does to an extent. Instead of watching TV or talking on cell phones, we went out in the woods and played, the boys and the girls, growing up. I remember there's a 91-year-old friend of my sister's that I talked to on the phone. She said, all the boys got mad. I said, what are you talking about? She said, well, when I got 11 years old, my mother made me quit playing tackle football. And the boys came over the house. She's our best player, She made me start wearing shoes and quit playing tackle football. And but what I'm saying is, the boys and the girls experienced the natural world. You didn't have the overpopulation. You had nature all around you. You didn't have the technology that takes you away from the natural world. We just went outside and played, and it was safe for the boys and the girls. They all played separately usually, and I was kind of angry when it got dark. I had to come inside and eat supper. If I wasn't at the supper table, my ass was grass.
Do you think there's any possibility that society gets back to the more natural world?
I think the natural world, and what I call the natural world, being around Mother Nature and experiencing the serenity that Spring Hill once embodied, I think that periphery is just moving further and further out. I don't think it returns. I think certain wildlife adapts, like you'll find raccoons and great horned owls. You still see them in suburbia, but the natural places that we knew will never come back here. Now, I do want to give an example. There was a Catholic family that owned a pharmacy, the Delshaw. It's one of the Delchamps. There's a little community on the south part of the county, Delshaw. Dr. Paul, the pharmacist, his daughter moved away, married, And she found a place in Massachusetts, she said it was so much like Spring Hill. So there are areas that exist, but those
What year
areas
did she
been
find
pushed
it?
out. Huh?
What year did she move?
She
60s, probably late
no,
60s.
she was probably talking about the 70s or the 80s.
Right.
And but she's, I found a place in Massachusetts that's just like Spring Hill, but those areas, whether it's Alabama or Massachusetts, they're just being pushed out, never to return to those areas. You just have to move
It's
to the peripheral areas that exist, and then they're constantly being pushed
another.
out.
As Ben was speaking, and as you're asking the question, often I'll pull out behind the library by the rugby field, and as I'm coming back into town, and I'll listen to NPR, and I'll sort of watch the sunset, and so I noticed there was I could hear a couple of owls, and I would see the owls fly out there, and I saw one owl, and this is within the last 3 or 4 years. I'd see the owl light on the upper upright of the goalpost, and the goalpost was swaying. I never realized that an owl can fly vertically. He'd come down on the ground, then he'd fly vertically right up and land up on the upright of the rugby goal, and the thing would sway. And then he'd see some prey, and he'd go down and grab it. And then as you walk around, you used to walk maybe 3 miles around the outer periphery, and you could come under those oak trees on the Avenue of the Oaks, and I could see that owl sitting up there. So the wildlife there is
Wildlife
recent,
adapts.
but like everything else, we had a place at Orange Beach for 102 years, and it's all that's changed too. We would leave. We'd go down to Mirabee, also pick up our report cards, go to Orange Beach, spend the summer there, and come back Labor Day because school started the day after Labor Day. And I can count on one hand the number of times we ever locked that door. And in Spring
While
Hill,
we were gone the whole
but
summer.
everything has changed. If you knew Orange Beach 70 years ago and you see what it is now, you don't even want to go down there because of the overpopulation, and the place is just ruined.
Yeah.
And so it's the same thing everywhere. And to answer your question, you just have to find somewhere else to go because it's changed. It's changed forever, not necessarily for the better.
Mm-hmm.
And so, to answer your question, I don't see it. It'll
Going
never
back.
return.
Okay. Well, I say you answered all my questions for today.
Well, I know you got a bunch more.
Well, we're running out of time, but I wish we could have talked about the stadium at Spring Hill College, because the remnants of that stadium were still here during our childhood.
Oh, the football stadium.
I'll tell you real quick. The athletic, they had a school that prep school here, just like Georgetown has a prep school and it's called Spring Hill High School, and it fed athletes up to the football team here. And I think they closed it down in 1935. But our uncle went to that school. It fed into Spring Hill College. And a childhood friend of ours was on that football team, too, at that Spring Hill High School football team. His father, who ended up going to Tulane and playing in the Rose Bowl. And so you had a lot of good athletes that came through that thing.
Certainly.
But by 1935, it was closed.
Because the players went to war.
Well, no. I think what happened with Spring Hill College, the stadium was open in the stadium, which is where the rugby field is now. I think it was opened in November of 1937, and the war. Yeah, I think the war probably ended that. They had teams here in the 20s and the 30s. It may have been on the way out before the war, but certainly the war finished it off.
And
Right.
what it
You know,
wasn't
the
around
football
during our childhood.
We could
But my sister tells me that during the war the stadium was scrapped for the steel.
Mm.
And so that was
It was a
protected.
mostly wooden stadium, but I can remember there was a black fella that was the caretaker for the campus here. And since our front steps gave us, before the construction of Tulane Hall, a wonderful view of the field where the ROTC marched and where the Byrne Library was, there on the east side of the Avenue of Oaks.
He lived in a house right on the corner, right at the west end of Tulane Hall. A black guy, Big John, a big black guy, and his family lived in that yellow house. And he was a caretaker for Spring Hill, and I can remember him. And his family lived there. And I talked to one of his daughters decades later, and she talked about the fond memories that she had living in that house.
Oh,
during the George McMillan campaign back
Yeah,
in the 70s.
that's probably near where my dorm is now, Portier, where the old retirement home is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it would be on the opposite side of Avenue Oaks,
Mhm.
of where.
In other words,
Your
on the other side, directly from Portier Place, looking across Avenue of the Oaks is the west end of Tulin Hall, right on that corner
Okay.
as you come through.
Yeah.
But
And-
we remember the lumber. It was mostly a wooden stadium built on steel structure underneath. We can remember the lumber from the stadium stacked in places. So Tom and I were born in 1948. So remnants of the wood from that stadium were still stacked on the right around where Tulin Hall is now, and right in certain places. But
Gotcha.
we
Yeah.
have no memory of the stadium itself.
I've seen pictures in the library, but
Oh, yeah.
But we're out of time for
Okay.
today.
We're
Okay.
probably long out of time.
But really,
What are we
thank y'all
gonna
for coming
double?
on.
No,
time?
thank you.
Yeah. I would like to personally thank everyone who tuned into this episode of the SHC Division of Business podcast. Our aim is to give young professionals insight into their desired field or potential job of choice. If you gain anything from this, or have any compassion whatsoever, please share with someone you see fit.